India's Andaman and Nicobar Islands are famous for their pristine beauty, untouched beaches and stories of our freedom struggle in the cellular jail. But it's also a very crucial strategic point for India with the now increasing maritime threat from China, which is why the Indian government has been fortifying the islands in water and on land. The Great Nicobar Development Project is one such initiative in this direction. It's a mega infrastructure project being built at a cost of about 72,000 crores at the southernmost tip of India. Great Nicobar is the largest of the Nicobar Islands. It's a sparsely inhabited 910 square kilometer patch. It has the Indira Point, India's southernmost point. Now, this project, which is being implemented by the Andaman and Nicobar Islands Integrated Development Corporation, will include an international container transshipment terminal, a greenfield international airport with a peak hour capacity to handle 4,000 passengers, a township, and a gas and solar-based power plant spread across 16,610 hectares. It's an opportunity for India to leverage the strategic location of the island, which is roughly equidistant from Colombo in Sri Lanka to the southwest and Singapore to the southeast. It's also close to the Malacca Strait, the main waterway that connects the Indian Ocean to the Pacific, which China has had its eyes on. The Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean region are of vital strategic and security interest to India as China seeks to expand its footprint across the region. Now, India is of course concerned about a Chinese build-up at the three choke points of Malacca, Sunda and Lombok Straits. In the recent years, it's faced opposition from within the country, with the Congress party and several environmentalists only recently saying that the project will harm the ecological balance of the region. But for the government, it means strategic security point. Let's try and understand more of how this is going to play out in the geopolitical situation that India faces currently. On the broadcast, I'm joined by General A.K. Siwach. He's a defense analyst, and I'm also joined by Pathikrit Pain, geopolitical analyst. Good evening and namaskar to both of you gentlemen. Pathikrit, let me start with you first. Would it be correct to say that the Andaman Islands and this particular point where the government is focusing upon and is building up militarily is a point which we can say that whoever holds control of this and the Indian Ocean region will have the control of the maritime security of the IOR?
Neha, first of all, we must remember that the Andaman and Nicobar Island already has India's first Tri Services Command with the presence of both Indian Army, Navy, Air Force and Coast Guard under one serving general. And if you look at the distance between Great Nicobar Island and the Malacca Strait, it's less than, say, 200 kilometers. So strategically, you have incredible proximity to the choke points. That's number one. Secondly, I would always look at it from the perspective of just geoeconomics as well. Primarily because if you look at Singapore, that one single island and nation state with one transshipment hub, which is the largest in the world, that transshipment port hub caters to 600 ports across the world, and it has transformed Singapore into a $500 billion economy. And so similarly, if India has to transform itself into a $10 trillion economy in the next one decade, it would have to expand its footprint beyond the geographical realm of mainland India, and it has to expand in areas of Andaman and Nicobar Island because of its strategic imperative, not just from the point of restricting or keeping an eye on the Chinese, but that area actually is almost 90% of global trade has some kind of a linkage to that region. So I think both from the perspective of economics as well as from the perspective of military, this is a very, very critical, a region where development has to happen. There are certain concerns that environmentalists are talking about. I would only say one thing. The future is about sustainable development. You can also at any point of time develop the region while taking care of the ecology. Merely taking the ecological excuse for not having any developmental work will not create jobs. That job creation, that improvement in livelihood can only happen when you do developmental work at the same time. And one very important thing we must understand, the entire theater of global economic operations is moving towards Asia Pacific, Indo-Pacific region. And if we do not take the first mover advantage in that region, considering that we have a geographical location and in that place, we would lose out that another bus, which we have already missed out many bus in the several decades in the past. I think this is one initiative. We must also remember this project was mooted and talked about in the 1970s. This is not something that is being talked about today. Yes, it is being materialized. I think once the government starts investing, the private sector would also come in, and you would create a major economic hub, which will be a focal point for converging of economic activities from across the region, and that would increase India's geopolitical, geo-economic, geostrategic leverage globally, wherein it would be much more easier for India to have negotiations on favorable terms in other areas as well.
Pathikrit, of course, it's taken a long time. But it's taken a long time for India to actually concretize these plans, which had been in proposal. It's been several years. But General Siwach, let me also understand from you the military perspective of it. The topmost concern, of course, is to sort of counter China and its expansionist policy. And we know that China has been notorious when it comes to these three choke points, Malacca, Lombok and Sunda. But militarily, what we're building there with this project, would we be then ready to counter China in the seas?
Yeah, absolutely. Shreya, see, one must understand as far as China is concerned, it is going in a big way in the Indian Ocean. And not only that, at any point of time, there are about 10 to 15 submarines, including nuclear powered submarine, loitering around in Indian Ocean. And also it is trying to encircle India by strings of pearls. You see, remember what they have done? They have made a port in Myanmar called Siwach, and also developing Coco Islands. Then Chittagong in Bangladesh, Haman-Tota, they have taken 99-year lease in Sri Lanka. They are developing two islands in Maldives as a military port. And then they have Djibouti in East Africa. And then they have Gwadar in Pakistan. If you see it, that this is the strategy of Chinese to encircle India and also to dominate the Indian Ocean. Remember that whosoever dominates the Indian Ocean will dominate the next century. The reason is simple. It is geoeconomics, because 70% of the world trade passes through this. And in case if your line of communication is safe and secure, then you are geoeconomically far better than the other country. Now, as far as India is concerned, remember that Andaman Nicobar Islands are the islands which are the springboard as far as the military strategy of India is concerned. Now, these two set of islands, Andaman and Nicobar, Andaman in north and Nicobar in south. See, Andaman are the one which are very close to Myanmar. And as far as Nicobar is the southernmost, the Great Nicobar, which we are trying to develop now, is almost about 200 kilometers from Sumatra, from Indonesia. And these are the ones which, if you occupy and if you develop these islands, especially by making the international airfield, as well as also making a deep port, then you will able to improve your economy. At the same time, you dominate Malacca state. The Malacca state is a choke point, and this is the biggest choke point as far as Chinese are concerned. They know it that as on today, there's 60% trade pass through the Malacca state, and they do not have oil more than 40 days. And in case there is a war, India has a capability and capacity to choke the Malacca state. But this will not stay for long, because Chinese are increasing their footprint in Indian Ocean. Whether it is Sunda, Lombok or Malacca state, they are going to develop their capacity to unshield it. So therefore, India has to develop Andaman Nicobar Island to an state where we can dominate the Indian Ocean, the communication line. And to do that, you have to develop the Great Nicobar Island into a military port. Not only that, it should be able to look after all types of aircraft.
Which is what we are doing now, General Siwach.
It also includes the trade with other countries. You see, Andaman Nicobar Command is a first step toward theaterization. It is an inter-service command of Army, Air Force and Navy. It's a very good beginning. There I Drustai. We should have developed it long time back, but I suppose this government is very serious.
Which is what my next question was, General Siwach, and let me take this to Pathikrit. Pathikrit, General Siwach said "Der Ai Durust Hai." The fact of the matter is that it's only now that we've started building new ports. We've started modernizing the existing ports that we have. What took us so long to actually understand the fact that the Chinese are a threat in the seas, in our waters as well? It's not new. It had been happening. We already know of China's expansionist policy. What took so long in actually concretizing this proposal?
I think, Shreya, there are two things. First of all, even though military always had a strategic vision, the political class for a long period of time in the past were always inward looking. They never thought of creating an India which can actually play a critical role in the global arena. That's one. Secondly, we were always bogged down by the environmental groups who would say, don't do this, it will harm ecology, don't do that. While I am strong supporter of maintaining and stabilizing ecological aspects, but it cannot be at the cost of development. It has to go to hand in hand. And I can tell you one thing, Shreya, the Chinese will use all kind of discrete means to discourage this transshipment port from coming up, because once you have a transshipment port of that stature coming up tomorrow, even an aircraft carrier can give a port of call in Great Nicobar. And look at the kind of pressure that you can, counter pressure, I would rather say, you can create on the Chinese, knowing that the 90% of Chinese trade always happens in that region, the choke point, through the choke points. So you have the Jaguars placed over there, you have the Pieta Poseidons, you have the Thanjavur West, Sukhois with BrahMos. You create a credible deterrence. And I must also reiterate one interesting statement made by a top political leader of India. And he stated that, if something starts in Ladakh, it does not necessarily mean it would end in Ladakh. So while we are all for peace, it is important to understand the Chinese do not believe in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. It doesn't believe, it only believes in the centrality of China. So today or tomorrow, they will create issues just so that there are issues not created, so that you create a minimum deterrence, so that you ensure that you tell them that you can also do the needful. I think this important port has to come up. Also, from the economic perspective, most of the Southeast Asian countries and smaller islands in the Pacific region have always been over-dependent either on the Americans or on the Chinese, because we have never given them a viable alternative. So when we talk about being a voice of Global South, we need to give them greater opportunities for trade. And you cannot expand trade unless you have some kind of a dominance and control over ports. And that is why you would see some of India's major business houses are expanding in the port business globally, as also India creating these new ports, whether this one or the coming one that is coming up in Vizhinjam. These are important aspects to ensure that you become a $10 trillion
talking of
economy.
Economics, and I wanted to ask this to General Siwach. General Siwach, the Indian Ocean region and the kind of cooperation that we need from other countries to actually counter China also becomes crucial at this point, whether it's Myanmar or Singapore or the Philippines or Indonesia or even the African subcontinent. All of these regions need to be taken on board when we think of countering China. And the kind of investments that China has done in these countries spells a lot of concern for the near future.
Shreya, no doubt about it. See, the point is, if you are stronger, the other nation will come very close to you. See, if you are militarily strong, see, as on today, India is the 5th largest economy, and in another 2-3 years, it's going to become a 3rd largest economy. It is the 4th largest military power. All these Asian countries, though they have a good relation with Chinese, but they are also having a lot of dispute with China, especially in South China Sea, because China of its own always bully around other countries, and it has now made the complete South China Sea part of China itself. So therefore, the point today, as far as Indian Ocean is concerned, the way the Chinese are increasing its footprint, it is a cause of concern for the whole world. And it is also not only the country which are there in very close to the Indian Ocean, also a country like US and also the European country, because the trade goes from here. This is the economic lifeline of the world. And in case if it is dominated by the Chinese, because they are increasing their footprint, this is a threat which is developing into a monster in time to come. Remember what is happening as far as China is concerned. It does not follow the rule of the game. Neither it followed freedom of navigation, rule-based international order, and it does not maintain territorial integrity and sovereignty of all nations. So all these nations, when it comes to China, they are all suspicious. They know it. China comes in a big way, and China put you on a debt trap, and China also dominate. See what they are doing against Philippines in South China Sea.
Yes.
They are using all the strategy. So the only way to counter China is develop militarily. And Andaman Nicobar Island, I can only say that this is to be developed at the fastest pace, and it should become a reality in another 15 years. Because if you have to dominate Indian Ocean and also to counter Chinese footprint, you have no choice but to develop Andaman Nicobar. And I can only say, as far as Andaman Nicobar is concerned, the whole country must speak in unison, including the opposition should understand it is strategically very imperative for us to develop Andaman Nicobar and Nicobar Island, which are very close to the choke point called Malacca State. And in case you have to counter China,
absolutely, General Siwach. Interestingly.
Also, one thing more. Also, it is a hub center of gas and oil. In case if you have to explore this, you have to be militarily strong. And I'm supposed that in time to come, it is not only the geomilitary,
security,
it is
trade,
geo-economy
energy,
also be a major point.
All of these are top priorities. And interestingly, long back, China had said it is the Indian Ocean, not India's ocean. But I think it's time that the world tells the Chinese that it's not the Chinese ocean as well. We'll leave it there. General Siwach and Pathikrit Pain, thank you very much to both of you gentlemen for joining us on Nation Tonight and sharing your perspective. Thank you very much.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.